Hey, everybody, and welcome to this deep dive. We're going to be taking a look at a topic that you guys are curious about,
Oh, yeah.
which is energy vampires.
Ooh.
So we've got a great YouTube video from The Alchemist to kind of guide us along the way.
Right.
And we're going to get into some of the details of their ideas in a sec. But first, I think the question on everyone's mind is like, is this just like a fun Halloween metaphor?
Yeah.
Or is this something more?
Right.
And like, if there really are these energy vampires lurking among us, how do we spot them?
Right.
And how do we protect ourselves from them?
Exactly. Those are great questions.
Yeah.
And The Alchemist in their video actually jumps right into it.
Okay.
And they start by saying that they're not really talking about like fangs and capes and like literally sucking blood. It's more about people who drain you
Yeah.
emotionally and mentally. You know, they might not even be doing it intentionally,
Oh, interesting.
but the effect is definitely real.
Okay, so not literal vampires, but the energy drain is a real thing. That's interesting. So what's fascinating, too, is you're kind of highlighting this key point that The Alchemist makes,
Yeah.
which is this idea that energy vampires exist on this spectrum of consciousness.
Absolutely.
Can you unpack that a little for us?
Absolutely. So The Alchemist argues that people who are less self-aware
Okay.
or more driven by what we might call the shadow self, are more prone to these draining behaviors.
Okay.
So think of it this way.
Yeah.
Everyone has a shadow self, right? Those parts of ourselves we don't fully understand or, we don't want to acknowledge.
Right.
And it's this less conscious, more reactive side of our personalities.
So someone who's more in touch with that shadow self might be less aware of how their actions are affecting other people.
Right.
They might just be creating drama or conflict without even realizing it.
Exactly.
Yeah, that makes a lot more sense than the image of like a vampire who's intentionally sucking someone dry.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And that's what The Alchemist is getting at here, is that a lot of these behaviors are unconscious. These aren't people who are deliberately setting out to harm others. It's more about their own needs and how they unconsciously seek energy from external sources rather than cultivating it within themselves.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
So it's like they're almost feeding off of other people's energy because they haven't learned how to generate their own.
Exactly. It's like a codependency.
Yeah. I'm starting to see why this is a little bit more than just like a fun Halloween concept.
Exactly.
So The Alchemist goes on to give us some tools for spotting these energy vampires.
They do.
So like, what are some of those behaviors we should be looking out for?
Yeah. So they list some things like constantly being embroiled in conflict
Okay.
or refusing to take responsibility for their actions.
Oh, yeah, I think we've all met those people.
Yes.
It's like they leave a trail of emotional exhaustion in their wake.
Exactly.
I remember they even used the words predator and prey when describing these dynamics.
They do, yes.
It's like you're being targeted for an energy snack.
That's such a powerful analogy, too, because
Yes.
it really highlights that feeling of being hunted or drained
Right.
by somebody else's neediness. It's not about intentional malice,
Yeah.
but it's just that lack of self-awareness that can make these interactions feel really one-sided.
Yeah.
You know?
For sure. And it sounds like it can be pretty subtle sometimes.
Oh, absolutely.
The Alchemist mentions these archetypes.
Yes.
Like the damsel in distress or the white knight who can fall into these patterns.
Yes.
I wouldn't have thought of that as energy vampires right away.
Right. I know those archetypes are so fascinating because
Yeah.
they often disguise the energy vampirism as something that's helpful or even heroic.
Right.
You know?
Like they think they're helping.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, for example, the White Knight,
Yeah.
appears very selfless on the surface,
Right.
constantly rescuing others.
Right.
But their actions can create a sense of dependency and subtly drain the energy of those they're trying to help.
It's like they need to be the savior to feel good about themselves.
Exactly.
And that neediness ends up draining the other person.
Exactly. It might be masked as support,
Right.
but ultimately it's draining.
It is. It's coming from that place of need.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's so interesting. And then you've got the martyr,
Oh, yes.
which The Alchemist argues is a particularly manipulative form of energy vampirism.
Yeah, they thrive on playing the victim.
Oh, yeah.
And they'll use their suffering to control and guilt trip others.
Oh, that's such a good point.
Yeah.
It's not just about being needy. It's about using that negativity and suffering
To manipulate.
to manipulate other people.
Yes.
Wow. So how would someone even recognize that in themselves?
Right.
If this is all happening on an unconscious level.
That's where the self-awareness piece comes in.
Yeah.
It's not easy.
Right.
But by paying attention to our own patterns and how our actions impact others, you can start to kind of shine a light on those shadow aspects of ourselves.
Okay.
It's a journey,
Yeah.
But awareness is definitely the first step.
I'm starting to see how tricky this can get. And that's also the first step to kind of dealing with these energy vampires in our lives.
Absolutely.
If we can start to spot the signs, maybe we can protect ourselves a little bit better.
Exactly. Recognizing the patterns is crucial, but it's only the beginning.
Okay.
The alchemist actually offers some pretty direct advice
Okay.
about what to do when faced with an energy vampire.
Ooh, I'm intrigued.
And it might surprise you.
All right, we're going to get into that right after this break. All right, so before the break, we're about to get into the alchemist's advice
Yes.
on how to actually deal with these energy vampires.
Yes.
And I'm a little nervous to hear this.
Well, get ready because they don't really mince words.
Okay.
They believe in directly calling out the behavior,
Okay.
even if it leads to conflict.
Wow, that's a bold strategy.
It is.
It seems like it could really backfire
It
and
can.
make things even worse.
It definitely could if you don't go about it the right way.
Yeah.
But the alchemist argues that this direct approach is really crucial because it brings awareness to the situation.
Okay.
So remember we were talking about
Yeah.
how a lot of energy vampires operate unconsciously.
Right.
So by confronting them,
Yeah.
you're holding up a mirror to their behavior
Right.
and forcing them to see the impact they're having.
So it's less about attacking them
Yeah.
and more about kind of helping them become more aware.
Exactly.
I can see how that might be valuable, even if it's uncomfortable.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's about shining a light on those shadow aspects.
Yeah.
The alchemist even talks about
Okay.
this magnifying glass effect that some energy vampires use.
Okay. Have you ever experienced that?
I have.
What's that like?
Oh, it's like they take any positive feedback and they just twist it
Yeah.
into an opportunity to kind of diminish you
Right.
while inflating their own ego.
It's so subtle.
It is, but it leaves you feeling deflated.
Totally.
Like you can't win,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah, it's like they can't handle genuine admiration without making it into some kind of power struggle.
Exactly.
It's so strange.
They use that magnifying glass
Yeah.
to amplify their own perceived greatness while simultaneously
Yeah.
shrinking your reflection in their eyes.
It's like they can't handle feeling good without making someone else feel bad,
Exactly.
which is pretty messed up.
It is.
You think about it.
It is, and it all circles back to that lack of self-awareness.
Yeah.
They may even be conscious of their actions,
Okay.
but they lack the genuine desire to examine themselves and change.
Yeah. The alchemist actually gives this example of people who constantly pick fights online.
Yes.
Under the guise of like waking people up.
Yes, they'll use spirituality
Yeah.
or social justice
Right.
as a shield for their need for conflicts and drama.
It's like they're weaponizing good intentions
Right.
to justify their negativity.
Well, exactly.
Yeah. And the alchemist contrasts that with the idea of the spiritual warrior
Yes.
who's actually genuinely committed
Yes.
to raising consciousness, but they do it with sincerity
Right.
and discernment. Not by stirring up a bunch of drama.
Exactly. It's
Yeah.
about choosing your battles wisely
Right.
and engaging in conflict from a place of genuine purpose,
Yes.
not just to feed your ego
Totally.
or your need for attention.
Okay, so we've talked about how to spot them.
Yes.
We've talked about the psychology a little bit.
Yes.
But what if we try confronting them
Right.
and it just doesn't work?
Right.
What if they just double down?
Well, that's where it gets really tricky.
Yeah.
And honestly,
Yeah.
you have to be prepared for that possibility.
Okay.
You might not be able to change them,
Right.
and sometimes the healthiest choice is to simply walk away.
I can see how that would be tough.
It is.
Especially if it's someone you care about.
It is.
But I guess that's where that whole taking the L concept comes into play.
Absolutely.
Can you give me an example of what that would look like?
Sure. So taking the L is about recognizing that sometimes
Yeah.
the most loving thing you can do for yourself
Yeah.
is to prioritize your own well-being, even if it means accepting a loss.
Okay.
So that could mean ending a friendship,
Right.
setting firm boundaries with a family member,
Oh.
or even leaving a job
Yeah.
where you're constantly being drained.
So it's not about giving up on the person,
Right.
but it's about recognizing you can't force them to change.
Exactly.
They're stepping out of their drama triangle
Yes.
and reclaiming your own power.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
It's about refusing to be a pawn in their game.
Right.
And remember, taking the L doesn't mean you're a failure.
Right.
It simply means that you're choosing to protect your energy and focus on your own growth.
I love that. Okay, so we've got direct confrontation,
Right.
setting boundaries,
Yeah.
and taking the L if necessary.
Yes.
Any other strategies?
Well, one of the most crucial pieces of advice that the alchemist offers is the importance of self-reflection.
Okay.
It's so easy to just focus on the other person's behavior,
Yeah.
but we need to be willing to examine our own patterns as well.
That makes sense. So it's not just about blaming the energy vampire.
Right.
It's about taking responsibility for our own part in that dynamic.
Exactly.
I'm starting to see how this goes beyond just protecting ourselves from other people.
It does.
Yeah.
We all have a shadow side.
Right.
The key is to become more aware of it so we can make conscious choices about how we interact with others.
And I think that's what you were saying before.
Yes.
We've all probably exhibited some of these behaviors at some point.
We all have.
Right. It's humbling.
It is.
So it's not about saying like, oh, you're an energy vampire.
Right.
And you're a good person.
Right.
It's about recognizing that we all have work to do.
We all do.
The goal is to become more conscious
Of our energy.
Of our
As
energy.
we impact others.
Right.
And,
Yeah.
you know, as we've been talking about these draining dynamics, it's made me wonder about the flip side.
Okay.
What about the people who seem to energize
Yeah.
everyone around them?
That's such a good question.
You know,
It's like there are people
there are.
who, instead of draining energy,
Right.
they amplify it.
Exactly.
What makes them different?
That's a fascinating point.
Yeah.
And it actually ties into something that the alchemist mentions
Okay.
in their video.
Okay.
They talk about how on that higher end of the consciousness spectrum, people tend to be more self-aware
Right.
and focused on cultivating their own energy
Okay.
rather than taking it from others.
So it's like they have this internal wellspring
Yeah.
that overflows into their interactions.
Exactly.
I know exactly the type of person you're talking about.
Right. These are the people who inspire us,
Yes.
uplift us,
Yes.
make us feel more alive.
Yes.
They're not taking energy, they're radiating it.
I love that. I wonder if there are certain qualities or behaviors that these energy givers have in common.
Right.
Maybe that's something we can explore
Absolutely.
another time.
I think that's a great topic for another deep dive.
Totally.
After all, who wouldn't want to learn how to cultivate
Right.
more of that positive energy?
Yeah, exactly. Speaking of which, I believe The Alchemist leaves us with a question at the end of their video.
They do.
Something for us all to ponder.
Yes,
Do you remember what it was?
I do. They ask, if everyone has the potential to be an energy vampire at times, how can we cultivate more self-awareness
Right.
and ensure we're not the ones draining others?
Ooh, that's a good one.
It is.
It is. Definitely something to think about.
Definitely.
And a great note to end this part of the conversation on.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we're back and ready to wrap up our deep dive into the world of energy vampires.
I think we've covered a lot of ground
We have.
and hopefully given people some real insights.
Yeah, it's like we've armed our listeners
Yes.
with this toolkit for dealing with energy vampires.
Exactly.
So before we go, let's recap
Okay.
some of those key takeaways.
Okay, so first and foremost, remember that energy vampires aren't necessarily evil masterminds
Right.
with a plan to drain our souls.
Yeah.
They're often operating from a place of unconsciousness,
Right.
driven by their own needs
Right.
and shadows.
It's not about demonizing them.
Right.
It's about understanding them.
Exactly.
And that's why that awareness is so important.
Yes.
Not only of their behavior, but also of our own reactions.
Absolutely.
It's really the first line of defense
Yes, it is.
in protecting our energy.
Absolutely.
And remember those red flags we talked about?
Yeah.
The constant need for drama,
The blame shifting.
the inability to take responsibility.
Yep. Those are all clues
Yeah.
that you might be dealing with an energy vampire.
And once you spot those signs, don't be afraid to set those boundaries.
Yes, set those boundaries.
You have the right to protect yourself.
You do.
You deserve to feel good.
Absolutely.
What happens when those boundaries aren't enough?
Right. Well, that's when you have to remember that sometimes the most loving act is to put your own oxygen mask on first.
Right.
Remember the alchemist's advice about taking the L?
Yes.
It might feel counterintuitive,
Right.
but walking away from a draining situation can be the most empowering choice you can make.
Right. It's like saying, I deserve better than this. I'm stepping out of the drama.
Yes.
I'm choosing to focus on my own growth.
Yes, and taking the L doesn't mean that you're giving up on the person.
Right.
It just means that you're choosing to focus on what you can control,
Exactly.
which is your own energy and well-being.
Your own little bubble.
Yes.
And that brings us back to that self-reflection piece.
Absolutely.
It's so easy to point fingers.
It is.
But we also need to be willing to look inward
We do.
and ask ourselves, how are we contributing to this dynamic?
Are we playing into it?
Are we the energy vampire?
In some of our relationships?
Right. We all have a shadow side.
Right.
It's about becoming aware of it.
So it's not about being perfect.
It's just about being mindful
Yes.
and doing our best
Well, to be aware.
to interact with others from that place of awareness.
Absolutely.
And I think that's where the power of this whole energy vampire concept lies.
I agree.
It's not about blame
No.
or labels.
It's about growth.
It's about growth.
And becoming more conscious.
Yes. And it's about recognizing that we all have the potential
Yes.
to be both the vampire and the victim.
We do.
And so as we wrap up today's deep dive,
Yes.
I just want to leave everyone with that powerful question that the alchemist posed.
Yes. Which is, if everyone has the potential to be an energy vampire at times, how can we cultivate more self-awareness
Right.
and ensure that we're not the ones draining others?
That's a question worth pondering.
It is.
And a great note to end on.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
For this deep dive into the world of energy vampires.
Yes.
Be sure to check out The Alchemist's YouTube channel
Absolutely.
for tons more on personal growth and spiritual awakening.
Yes. And until next time.
Happy energy management, everybody.